Good morning, guys, and welcome to the weekly webinar series for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm really delighted to welcome back Francie Jain. She's the founder and CEO of Terawatt.co, and she was a guest on the show a couple months ago. And the function of Terawatt is to be the Airbnb of executive coaching, pairing clients with coaches, and being a platform. And with that, she's also joined by Dr. Tommy Thomas. He's also an executive coach. We're going to be discussing reversing burnout and attrition. It's also been presented at the ALA this past year in Philadelphia. I'm really happy to have them on and welcome to the webinar. So guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and I'll let you guys take it away.
Okay, cool. Great. Thank you, Dr. Lou. So this is a presentation we did in Philadelphia earlier in the summer. And so we didn't want to make this boring, but we did want to share this with your audience because there's a lot of parallels in the medical space because of burnout. And I think there's a lot of interest in medicine about what is burnout and how you can address it. And so we thought this could be interesting for you guys. So we'll try to present this to you in a way that's a little bit more perhaps conversational that we might have done in the past. And then Dr. Lou, please jump in whenever you have questions. And actually, I think we're going to make you be the recipient at some later on the presentation, and you can give us your take on it. You'll see it's actually quite easy. But okay, so let's see. One thing I'm not sure about is how to move forward on the slides. Oh, did that work?
Yep, that worked.
Okay, cool. So here we are. And then, so learning objectives don't really matter too much for us, but we were just trying to just make sure this is relevant to librarians. And this is just a great little cartoon about someone yelling about feng shui of the books, which we thought could be a sign of burnout. And then there's a little agenda about it. So we just give an overview of why teams thrive. We give a really cool case study that's from Dr. Thomas, and we have an interactive activity, and then we discuss. The reason teams thrive is really to do with psychological safety. And so psychological safety is an agreement within a team. It's a team feeling among a group of people. They feel they are safe to express themselves without any detrimental impact. So meaning they won't get fired, they won't get reprimanded, their view is respected. And this is really interesting because in 2015, Google wrote an article alongside New York Times noting that the one single thing that united their best teams was a high degree of psychological safety. And so if you think about Google's company, their primary goal is innovation and profitability. And what is innovation and profitability? Really just efficiency, right? It's working well together. So that was really interesting because it gave everyone out there a roadmap that if we're able to have a high degree of psychological safety throughout our organization, we can increase efficiency. And then we talked about why it matters for libraries, but really the question is, why does it matter for all of us? And it matters for all of us because the more that psychological safety exists, the less we have groupthink, the more edge case scenarios are thought through, the more that we help the most vulnerable in our communities. And there's a sort of a belief, it's like how do you call it, but something called intersectionalism. And the idea is when you make solutions and include the most vulnerable of the population, it helps everyone. And so that's a little bit what we're talking about here. Okay. And so this is actually Dr. Thomas's case study. It was his work that created this data. It's really interesting. And so he was working with a healthcare system in Colorado that had 24% unemployment, voluntary employee turnover, meaning employees were quitting at a rate of 24% on that per year. And they were concerned because they're in a small town in Colorado, and they reached out to Dr. Thomas's organization, and they started using his content, which is called Opposite Strengths. And they found that when they trained and helped the people practice his content, that every year the quit rate, the voluntary employee turnover rate went down 1% to 2% a year. So that's what you're seeing here is the declining rectangles are showing that the returns, that there was a huge return to the organization, and that ultimately after 9 years, they were able to get their employee turnover to 4%. And the difference between 24% turnover and 4% turnover was annually $32 million a year. And then what we said in the presentation, and I'll say to this group as well, your primary goal may not be to save money or have higher retained earnings. But what's interesting about this is that if you have $32 million a year, you just can be on offense as opposed to defense. And so it just gives an organization a lot more optionality about how they want to run their business, their organization. Let's see. Oh, sorry. We're going to play a game. Dr. Thomas, do you want to introduce us?
Sure. You made a comment on the Poudre Valley Health System case?
Yeah. Why don't you exactly. So tell us you can talk a little bit about the organization great.
It started out in 1996 when the CEO, who had attended some of our seminars individually, he became CEO of Poudre Valley Health System. His name was Ruland Stacy in 1996. And he's the kind of CEO that just doesn't like to have an organization that's not at the top of the game. And so he and the other C-suite executives started looking at what was going on at Poudre Valley Health System, which today is a part of University of Colorado Health. So you won't find it as a standalone organization anymore. And one thing they noticed was that they said there seemed to be a lot of people walking out the door, and they were talking about seemed to be a lot of people quitting, but they weren't measuring it. That's a real lesson for every organization. You want to measure as much as you can about your organization. Well, they started measuring it, and they found they had 24% turnover rate. And I've discovered in England that turnover means profits. We probably should talk about an increased retention rate for those people in England that are watching. And boy, the average for healthcare industry was about 19%. And the average for industries overall is about 13%. So healthcare as an industry was higher than the average industry, and they were higher than the average in the healthcare field. So they went, whoa, we need to do something about this. So they developed a strategy, which I really wasn't let in on until 2008. They used what I did as a core platform for creating a dynamic, collaborative culture. In so many words, they said, we're a very competitive organization. People are constantly fighting with each other and trying to do better than one another or take control. And I can see that you understand this dynamic in healthcare systems. So we're going to try to move it from this extreme competitive environment to bring in more collaboration. So it's never a case, competition's good and collaboration's good, but when you get too much of either one, that's when the problems occur. So there's way too much competition. So they wanted to create collaboration and teamwork and getting people to understand one another. We started that. We really started in 1998, and they saw some improvements. And that's when they really started it in earnest in 2000, where they were training 400 people a year. At the time we started, they had about 3,000 employees. So that was about 15% or so of the population. When in 2008, they had about 5,000 employees, so they were growing. And so when you look at that graph and you can see the turnover rate, I'll use that term, the turnover rate was dropping each year. We were at that first year, we'd only trained about 15% of the population. Then the second year, maybe 25%. So it was showing that the rate was, even though we hadn't trained everybody, the rate was steadily going down the more that we got trained. And so it was a cumulative effect over those 8 years. And toward the end, toward 2007, 2008, we had trained the majority of the population. So opposite strengths became a language of communication within the hospital, and it created this psychological safety. Now you could talk to somebody about overemphasizing a particular strength they have rather than shutting up because you talk too much. And so it was a way of communicating that made everybody feel safe and feel respected for who they were. and they began to understand the differences among people and began to accept those differences. So that was the gist of the whole study. And I didn't find out about this until 2008 when I went up and visited with the CEO. And he said, "Hey, do you want to know what we've been doing up here?" And I said, "I know what you've been doing. You've been training people in opposite strengths." He said, "No, let me show you this." And he showed me basically this chart. And he said, "This is what we've done with our turnover rate over these 8 years." And I said, "Wow, that's really nice for you." And he says, "You know what that means financially?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Based on this reduction in the turnover rate, we save about $32 million a year now." And I was stunned because I wasn't measuring the return on investment that they had. And so I went back after I got back home. I pulled out all my invoices for that period of time and I totaled them up, and it was about $400,000. And I calculated how much they had saved over those 8 years, and it was about 80 million. So they got what was that? Was that 20,000% return on investment? And I thought, wow, now I know how to talk to organizations about why they should be doing something like this, because it really pays off financially. And it also pays off as far as going to work and enjoying being there. And that's why the turnover rate went down.
Yeah.
Yep.
Should we pause? Want to talk a little bit about this, or should we keep going to the experiencing opposite strengths?
That's the gist of it. I'd be happy to take questions or discuss it, or go on to what opposite strengths is and give you a little taste of it.
Yeah, Dr. Lou, what do you think? What would you like to do?
Yeah, we for the audience, talk about your methodology. A lot of people haven't heard of opposite strengths, what it is, and we have around 10 minutes or so, and how can people find you and connect with you? I know you help a lot of organizations and groups with this format, and also incorporate what is the key shift that sparked this reduction in employee turnover.
Yeah, good question. You know what I think would be a really good way to answer that is, let's go to the next slide. And because it's so cool. We're going to play a game, and this is basically what everyone experienced or anyone who uses opposite strengths experiences. Okay, so we have blue cards. Do you want to run through these, Dr. Thomas, and we can do it on Dr. Lou?
Yeah, this is a very condensed version of what everybody went through, because we did live seminars with 40 to 50 people, and they took 2 days to do. And so there was a lot of really deep understanding about this concept. This is the essence of the concept that we did. The opposite strengths is based on this concept that we are all composed of the same 3 pairs of opposite strengths. And that's one way that we can create a way of communicating among people, is because everybody has the same strengths that we're talking about. And that's usually different from typologies, because they categorize people and they can't go between categories. And so you can't often understand somebody else in terms of what you're experiencing. So the first thing we do is we want to find out, what are your lead and supporting strengths in each pair? And so this is a way we have an assessment that is much more valid and reliable than this process, but this is pretty good. So what we do, we show you these 2 blue cards and just ask you to read those 2 cards to yourself and decide which one of these fits you better, is more like who you naturally are. And you're probably going to see some of yourself in both of them, but one of them will more likely say, yeah, that's more like me. For me, I would pick number 1. I tend to take a lot of time to think before making a decision. Sometimes I use my gut feel. Most of the time I stop and think, and I want to understand before I move into action. So
what do you think, Dr. Lou? Between these 2, which one do you pick?
I'm number 2.
Gut.
And you, Francie?
Feel. Oh gosh, it's a hard one. So I'm always the person where I can't decide, but I think probably more on 2, just because I feel like It's already synthesized. So I'll go with 2.
Okay. All right. So we got one person that leads with number 1 and 2 people that lead with number 2. But we all 3 of us do both of these things. So they're a part of who we are. The first, should I just go ahead and I think in this context is just explain what these cards are referring to. So the basic pair of strengths that we have in opposite strengths is thinking and risking. And so thinking is the ability to analyze and plan and basically understand is the goal of your thinking strength. Risking doesn't mean gambling and it doesn't mean danger. It means activity and movement. And we use the term, it took several years to come down on a specific term that was the best one to describe what this is. And we came up with risking, but it's a dynamic, moving strength. So it's an active strength. So what you two were saying was that you tend to move into action first, and then you follow that, you support that with analysis. I tend to do analysis, and then I support that with action. So I move slower than you do. You move faster than I do. And in organizations, sometimes I would think, hey, you two are just always going off and doing things and making mistakes. I like that. What's wrong with you? And you could say to me, you just sit there and you don't do anything. What's wrong with you? So we get people to understand that this is a difference among people, and you have both qualities, but this is just who people are. And we also get into flexibility. So we're not saying just because this is who you are, that's it. You have some responsibility to flex as well. But that's the first way that we look at differences among people. Do you lead with thinking or do you lead with risking?
Okay. Let's go to the second one. Oops, sorry. Gotta go back here. Okay.
So the next step is we break down thinking into 2 kinds of thinking. And so we ask people to read these cards and say, which one of these better fits you? I tend to see things as they are rather than as they could be, or I tend to see things as they could be rather than as they are. You got yours, Doctor. And Francie?
Yeah, I'm definitely 2.
Yeah, I'm also 2 as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Let's back up and go home. Can we guys? So that's unusual because our data over the decades has shown that in the average seminar we do in the population, about 2 out of 3 people would choose number 1. That is the predominant way that people think, at least, and most of our data is from the United States. Some of it's from Canada and other countries, but most of it's the US. So the strengths that are behind these cards are practical thinking and theoretical thinking. So when you tend to see things as they are, that's practical, realistic, grounded thinking. And when you see things as they could be, that's theoretical thinking. That's imagination, possibilities. It's more future oriented, whereas practical thinking is more present or past oriented. And they are just different ways of thinking and perceiving the world. But when you have people working together, you would not want to put together a team of the 3 of us, and that's all there is, because we would just be coming up with all these options and possibilities, and most of them would be terrible because we wouldn't be testing it against reality. So in a really well-functioning team, you want people that do both of these things, because we come up with different possibilities and use our imagination. People that lead with practical thinking will be able to test them out and tell which ones are good and which ones aren't. So you need a combination of people that do this. So that's the second way that we look at differences in people, and the way that we're the same, because we all do both those things. The third way is it's a breakdown of that risking strength. It's an orientation toward others or an orientation toward yourself. I tend to prefer working on a team as an orientation toward others. You like to be with people. You like to collaborate. You like to rely on other people. You trust people out of the gate. And I tend to prefer working on my own, which is more of a self-orientation. I tend to be more self-sufficient. I'm more confident in myself than I am in others. I would prefer to work by myself rather than with other people. So which one of those do you think, and we always stress throughout the seminar, all of these strengths and all these behaviors are equally valuable. You could make a value interpretation that one is better than the other, but that's not our basis. Our basis is that all of these things are equally valuable and equally needed. So it doesn't say anything good or bad about you as a person if you choose one or the other.
I tend to be number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same.
So that's what we would call independent risking, and that's the one I would choose as well. And so we tend to be more aware of ourselves. We tend to be more focused on our own goals and ideas than with other people. People that chose number 1, I prefer to working on a team, are more naturally collaborative. They like to be around people. They're the kind of people you want to invite to a party because they'll stay at the end and help you clean up. And whereas we're gone about halfway through, we've had enough of being around people. And this is a very important mix to have in a team, because you want to have collaboration, which is represented by number 1, but you also want to have people that are willing to speak their minds, which is number 2. You just don't want to have, if you have too much of number 1, you have groupthink. Nobody's willing to people do things that they wouldn't really like to do because nobody has any objections to it. But if you have too much of number 2, you just have a lot of people that don't get along and just want to do things the way they do it. So you need a mix of these people, and you need to realize that when you're on a team, you need to draw from both of these things. You need to be collaborative, and you also need to speak up and speak your own opinion. And that's what makes a really great team. It makes great decisions from a team.
Yeah,
That's
I
neat.
love this one. Oh, and then Dr. Thomas, tell the story. And then at the conference, we did a thing where we asked people to put a story together with all 3. That was fun. That's hard. So we'll challenge you, Dr. Lou, to see if you want to do that.
When we have more time, at the end of each one, we would ask people to volunteer times, tell us about times that you've been successful showing that particular strength. And then after the third one, after the red cards, we'll ask Dr. Lou here, to put together your 3 cards and tell us a story about how you've expressed all these in your life that's significant to you. And so yours were risking, tend to move into action. You tend to be theoretical, more imagination and possibilities, and independent risking. So you tend to be more self-sufficient and self-confident.
Yeah. I think typically it would be in my career, especially in healthcare, where you have to work in teams and you have to be practical and you have to analyze everything. But as an entrepreneur, I have a different vision than that of healthcare. I tend to be more solopreneur, doing things on my own and having a vision. But really interesting. How can people connect with you and follow you and reach out to you? And maybe we have a part 2 for this webinar as well.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah,
Well, you can reach me through terawatt.co. I've got a page there, and we've actually got Francie, is that page still up with the ALA on it?
Oh, yeah, we can see that link. Yeah. I'm going to just take off the thing and back to our faces. Yeah, we do. We have that page. Actually, it's a great idea. I'll turn that over. Do you want to talk about it, Dr. Thomas?
Sure. Yeah, we've created a CoachBot for the people that attended our presentation, where they could go into this CoachBot, and there's a link to it on that page, and they could ask questions about psychological safety in libraries and the research that we had and the content of our presentation and all that. If somebody wanted to experience opposite strengths on their own, they could do that by going to oppositestrengths.com, and I've actually set up the homepage so that anybody can fill out our assessment and then get a free 6-minute video report on the results, which would be explaining the lead strengths and supporting strengths in these 3 pairs.
Yeah. Oh, love. That's so great. So I'll send you those 2 links. So it's the CoachBot and then the oppositestrengths.com for the self-assessment. That'd be good. That'd be fun. Yeah. So isn't this so cool? So yeah, this is all. So not only does Dr. Thomas been working this for his whole career, but also his father started it. Isn't that so cool? It's really been like you talk about it, but I love to hear the story about how it's over the years you've developed it and evolved.
The whole system started from my dad's work as an executive coach back in the 1950s. He was one of the very first executive coaches in the country. He worked for a firm called RH&R, Rohr, Hibbeler, and Replogle, which today is RHR International. And he and his fellow psychologists called themselves psychological consultants to management. So they didn't call themselves executive coaches back then, but that's essentially what they were. So I grew up we would talk about it because we had a similar kind of philosophical affinity for these kind of things. And we both believe in theoretical thinking. So I enjoyed talking about this growing up. And then I decided I liked math and psychology. So I found an educational program called psychometrics, which is measurement in psychology, statistics, and research design. So that's where I got my PhD. And then I joined my dad, and he had created this and created the seminar and created the assessment, and it was growing as I was growing up. And then I joined him, and we took it out to more organizations and wrote more books about it and just did more things with it. And today I'm evolving it into a digital platform that any organization can use. And I'm training CoachBots to do what my dad did back in the 50s, but using his knowledge as the base for what they do.
Yeah, excellent. We really need to move on to the next guest, but we would love to have you on as another webinar for the part 2 or part 3 series, because it sounds like this opposite strengths I'm curious later on to hear like how you incorporated into the healthcare and the specific tactics. Would love to have a part 2 and part 3.
Healthcare was, over the decades, was probably the leading industry that we worked in. And maybe that was because there was so much competition and conflict in this that they needed us more than other industries. But so we've got a lot of experience working in healthcare.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and keep up the great work.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.